Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Welcome to Table Talk here at Covenant Methodist Church. I am Nick Shepard, and this is
Hey, Kyle Gatlin.
it's backwards. Typically,
it
it's
is.
the other way around.
Yeah.
Kyle, how you doing, man?
Doing good. So when you said tell stories, when I was a kid, telling stories was a lie.
Yeah.
That's what we.
Yeah.
Did you tell a story? That's what parents went. Are you telling a story right now? I went, no, but they
we are.
they went. Are you lying?
Are you fooling?
Yeah.
Telling stories?
Yeah.
Well, Sunday we walked into this passage from Matthew, where Jesus starts talking about Jonah, and one of the core concepts that came up was this idea of stories that we live, that we walk into each day. And so you talk about, retelling stories. The idea of like false stories is actually going to be part of our conversation today. So I think it works. Yeah, because I think it's interesting that people, we typically, we are not computers. We see the world through the lens of stories. It's just who humans have always been. I mean, it's why, I don't know, what did the last Marvel movie make? Rarely are
The last good Marvel movie. You got to I clarify that. The last good Marvel movie, which is a few years ago.
Well, I think it was Dune. The Dune movies are up in the billions, right? We are so invested in narrative because it helps us make sense of our identity, our purpose, our meaning. So Kyle, let's throw you something. When your feet hit the floor each morning, what story do you feel like you're living in or walking into?
Oh, The first story I'm walking into is my dog well taken care of.
Yeah.
So literally,
Yeah.
because that's the first thing that greets me in the morning. Literally, she's right beside me when I wake up. That's just where she sleeps. So the story begins with making sure her story begins the day
Properly.
right. Yes.
Well, let's take that
so
and look at a different facet. Talk about stories, identity, purpose, meaning, role of a caretaker, right? Which is actually a big piece of why God made us in the first place. Like it's kind of what you should be doing.
Yeah.
Right. And I know that that's the lens you take for a lot of what you do here as a pastor is caretaker in loving the people that you encounter here on a daily basis.
Yeah, and my story begins, with taking care of myself. Actually, second after my dog.
Yeah.
Then my routine every morning is reading, seedbed, wake up call with J.D. Walt. I read that. I don't listen to it. I get more of reading than I do listening.
Yeah.
And then I am currently reading through the New Testament. Then I'll read through the Old Testament, and then read through the New Testament again for this year. So that's just part of taking care of myself by getting God's word into me two or three different ways. Is that because I can't get people to live into God's story as their pastor if I'm not living into God's story in my own life.
Yeah.
So that's where I hit the ground running there, but I'm really not running. I'm hitting the ground sitting technically.
Yeah.
The day was the day I'm recording this was it's one of the colder days we've had in a while. So I was actually able to light up the fire. So I was really, really excited this morning. So
we don't have a fireplace. I'm a bit jealous, but
I'll do it again the next day too, because it'll be cold again in the morning.
Oh, lovely news. So dear listener, I hope that you're past this.
Yeah, they will be. We'll be hot again by the time people listen to this one.
But I think it's interesting, the idea of like different stories, even in what you said, taking care of myself, doing the maintenance that it takes to actually do the rest of your day. Somebody could approach that with a fully kind of different narrative or mindset. I've been in the headspace before where it almost sounds more like, well, I need to do, this is my part of what God wants me to do today. It's getting up and reading my Bible. Like, that's not wrong. And there's 1,000 other variants of it. I just think it's interesting how we can do the same thing and each different person has a different way kind of like conceptualizing it, right? I like how you conceptualize it. I think that's a really healthy thing. So I'm curious.
And there are people listen to this that probably will take on the role of caretaker more, because if you have young kids in your household,
Mhm.
or even teenagers, what are you doing every morning? You're making sure that they have what they need.
Yeah.
To begin their day, to start living into their story. We're going to use that word. And a lot of times their story is about going to class and being with friends and all that stuff. So there's a number of people, parent-wise, in our world, in our community, in our church, that their first thought has nothing to do about them.
Yes.
It's about the other person, about that
Mm.
2-year-old or that 5-year-old or that 15-year-old that doesn't want you thinking about them, but you are.
Or about 75-year-old or 80-year-old.
That's correct.
Like both ends.
Yes. We just had recently somebody that had been caretaker almost over a year
Mhm.
for a aging parent that with dementia or whatever, and that was part of their daily life every morning.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was their story at the time, was helping someone else
Mm.
in their story.
And I think that's beautiful for a lot of reasons, but I think the danger that we find, just talking about different stories, different whatever, there is a strong danger of, in that caretaker role, for instance, if it's all on you. It's like you hear people talk about, especially single or like stay-at-home parents, like, oh, I don't feel like I feel like I'm losing my identity in this role.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a difference between the assignments that God's given us and who we are. But that's one of the ways that the story thing can be so hard, is we don't even realize that because we're just living into this role, into this, all right, today is about taking care of these things. You want to kind of loosen that sense of identity in the process, right? So, but now my thought here, because for me, the way I would answer that is I'm very much would cast it in terms of like trying to figure out, all right, Jesus, what do you have for me today? In the sense of almost like an adventure. Like there's a discovery thing. Myself and another guy named Mike Woodham are very energized by the idea of, or the feeling of curiosity. Like that's a strong spiritual like spur for me. Like, oh, Jesus, I'm curious. What are you up to here? I want to know more. I want to see what you have in store for today. Almost that like explorer role.
Yeah.
And one of the things, Kyle, you know this context, like one of the things that I love doing in my job most, in the ministries that we work with especially, is helping people come online to a sense of, okay, what is Jesus trying to do in this moment right now? Like, all right, this hard thing's happening. Jesus, what are you doing? And help, let's engage. Let's figure out what's going on in your heart. What could Jesus be up to? Or, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. It's not scripted here, but yeah, that discovery idea is very crucial to me. So I'm curious your thoughts. Why do you think that stories shape us more deeply than like just straight information does?
Well, I'll go back to the stuff that many of us experienced, particularly in upper high school and even to college, to grad school or whatever. There's so much stuff that we simply regurgitated.
Mhm.
We learn, we hear, we read, or we hear, and we memorize.
Yeah.
For a moment in time. Particularly those classes, if you were in college or grad school or whatever, and you knew it was not a cumulative final, you didn't have to worry about what you've test 1, test 2, test 3, whatever those tests were.
Yep.
After test 1, you just totally forget about it, right? Because you're learning just for that moment, and you're trying to get that grade. You're trying to pass that class or whatever it is. But when you think about stories and why they have an impact, you remember them.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably a scientific reason for that on the right side, left brain type thing, that that story engages both sides of your brain. I think it engages the not only the cognitive side, because you're hearing the facts, you're hearing all that stuff, but you're also in the story, you're also getting the images on the other side of your brain. And I can't remember what the right side, left side meant, type thing. I just know we got two sides. Sorry. One's a creative side, one's more of the
rational.
Right. Isn't that right? So I think stories engage that. And you got to remember that's really how we were created. We were not created with a writing utensil or a writing device.
Yeah.
So that you could record everything that you learned and passed it on. How was everything passed on? Orally for years. And it wasn't till Gutenberg we had mass.
Yeah.
So we're talking
mass printing.
We're talking about centuries of passing down stories. And majority of those stories that were passed down were not written down.
Yeah.
A few, and when, in the Roman Catholic Church, you had the stories of Jesus and the early, and in the New Testament stuff. That wasn't written down until, you look at, and then the writings of antiquity and all that stuff. Very few things are still around that were written down, type thing. And so we were created with this capacity to not only tell a story, but remember a story. And the reason that we can remember them, the reason we have so many things that we have available today is because those stories have kept getting passed down and passed down and passed down because people remember them. And that's why Jesus told the stories, truthfully.
Yeah. And so you bringing that up, it's not only the we just know this to be true, but Jesus, most of what he says is in the form of parables or imagery and metaphor, right? So I just think it's interesting that we seem pre-built to see the world through that lens.
Yeah.
In that sense.
And you and I both have been on these retreats where, particularly for men, type thing, that what we remember and what engages us is some part of a story.
Yeah.
Whether it's seeing just simply the trailer to Gladiator or the trailer to a war movie or something like that you would have, or even Forrest Gump, type thing. Something about those stories sticks with us and opens up something in our hearts and minds when we hear those stories or we re-engage with those stories. So that's just, we're just wired that way. So I can't speak for women because I are not one.
I are not one.
Yeah, I are not one. So but I know that for the men that is a big thing for us.
Well, and I think it's interesting, not really a rabbit trail, but kind of C.S. Lewis talks a lot about Mere Christianity, about how, all right, so here's what I'm saying, how you can tell that there is something designing us and putting our souls into us, not because we all believe that this is right and this is wrong, but that because we all know that there is a right and there is a wrong, right? There is a sense there is something this should be a certain way and this should not be a certain way. I'm going to make a similar argument for we all have this story sense within us. So I think it's put there to draw us into the story that God is telling in that sense, and if that doesn't make sense, sorry, but in the same way that something about consciousness and how we see the world through the lens of right and wrong, we also see the world through this story lens. And I don't think that's by accident. I think it is like a lot of things built into us by God. It's there to point us back to himself. Because what are the three or four, you get this a lot in evangelism stuff where everybody's asking four questions. Why are we here? What went wrong? How can we fix it? What does the future look like? Right? And every religion answers those four questions in that way. And that's a story. That's how did this all start? explain to me why things are as bad as they are. What is the proposed solution and where is this going to go? Like that's a narrative arc in that sense. And I think it's interesting. Like it's easy for us to, especially in the church, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but it's easy for us to talk in terms of like, oh, the core spiritual conflict for us is, do we believe God or do we not believe God? Right. But I think if we look under the surface in a lot of the situations where like that would play out, I think we're going to find that that narrative that we're living in, or the narratives that we're living in, is actually the thing that we're like, I don't want to say where the spiritual warfare is, but kind of, right? Especially in the sense of like, we all live in this reality where God is this side character instead of like the person writing the story who is gracious enough to let us be part of it by existing. I don't know. I'm compelled by that idea that there is something built into us that is drawing us to the guy or the person writing the story. But in our sinful brokenness, we just keep making it about ourselves. Right. So I don't know. So we got this question here. What do you think it looks like when somebody is living in their own story? Like, oh, I'm living in my narrative, I am a blank or whatever, and putting themselves at the center of their own little story. I don't know if anything comes to mind for you there.
I think, I mean, I think, what'd you say, what it looks like? Which question are we at? Which question we at?
You know what? Second question of that section.
Yeah.
Let's just skip to this though.
Yeah.
How do we sometimes treat God as a side character rather than, God?
Well, we technically and practically just not even acknowledge he's around, right? I mean, you know, let's just go back to the opening up the story or opening up the question.
Yeah.
When when my feet hit the ground this morning, what was I thinking? Outside of making sure my dog doesn't mess around my house and make sure she goes on the grass outside.
Yeah.
It was about, okay, God, where are you going to meet with me today? But if that's not part of our equation, then what do you do? Wake up, looks the same, making sure my dog's taken care of, and then I do what I want to do. Then I grab a cup of coffee, and then I don't know, watch the news, see how it's going to affect me today.
Yeah.
I send off an email or a text message trying to set up a meeting that would benefit me today, that would maybe make my business prosper or make a connection with my business, and I have no thought at all of what God is doing in my life and where God is even present in that day. So I think, and a lot of times this is for most, I'm going to say most people, probably most people listening to this, it's not a conscious thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like you get up and, if you're a business owner particularly, you're getting up and you got people responsible. You're responsible for them. You're responsible for making sure they have work for the day and they're going to get paid. And you're worried about that. And so you're getting up and you're thinking about somebody else. Not a bad thing. It's sort of that caretaker thing. If you're a business owner, that God doesn't come in the picture because it's about what is next.
Yeah.
For us, for the day, for making sure my business is successful, or making sure, if you're a physician or something like that, making sure my patient's taken care of, making sure I'm ready for my patients, whatever. It is an afterthought. And maybe at the end of the day, you look back and go, I bet God was somewhere today and I just missed it. So I think
Yeah.
for people, again, for our audience, I think it's so subtle, and sometimes it's just not thought about. It's not. Again, this is part of the reason why the psalmist will say, first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
That's, there's a reason why that historically your great people in the faith would tell you they wake up early in the morning and begin the day, meeting with God, whether reading or praying or both, type thing. Because if you don't purposely do that, then life hits you pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, or life comes at you quickly, to quote a famous actor. Okay. Ferris Bueller.
Okay. Matthew Broderick?
Matthew Broderick.
Right.
Matthew Broderick. Yeah.
And we had another question. You're like, what are some warning signs that we're trying to fit God into our story instead of joining his? But I think you really just talked through that. What I find compelling about what you just said is that, like, that's so relatable. And like, well, yeah, we've been there, we've done that. But like, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because it is very possible that as we're living life with God and living out of our identity in him, he has assigned us to be a faithful business owner, to go and provide for these other families, to just be wise stewards of what he's given for the future. Like, the actions that you just charted out, they're two completely different internal realities per the story. Because in one version of the story, you're the person on your own, having to figure it out yourself. Maybe God has an opinion about it. I don't really know if I can find it or know that. Versus a version of that where it's more, hey, I wake up and I'm living in a reality where I am made for connection with God. And even if I'm like not feeling it or today's struggling or whatever, at least having it in your mind and acknowledging like, oh yeah, God is here and is like actively taking care of me. And I'm walking to work with him and I'm encountering people walking with my Father in that sense. Those are just two night and day things, right? And I think if we can get, and I've been this guy, if we can get to the end of the day and be like, oh, maybe Jesus had an opinion on that today. I think that's a narrative in which we are the ones running our lives versus like, oh, my story is that I got to walk with Jesus today into everything. And I'm not saying that I'm there by any means. I just think that's the target, right? Especially when so much of what we're struggling with on a daily basis are different narratives getting thrown at us and put upon us, right? My phone buzzed in my pocket at our worship planning meeting earlier at least 7 times. Only 2 of them mattered, and the rest were, come to this event, email, you want this thing, where it's like, oh, hey, life is about this, life is about this, life is about this. And I don't think we realize how those other narratives start shaping us in a sense.
Yeah. And again, go back to the question, what are the warning signs? And I'm not saying this because I'm a pastor, although it is my job to remind people about this. It was a topic that you and Sarah addressed a few weeks ago in part of our Munificent series, right? What are the warning signs that you're leaving God out of your story? Well, when you don't put him first in your financial part, right? That is a visible warning sign. There's a reason that Jesus talked about that.
Where your treasure is, there your heart shall be also.
That's right. So that is one of those warning signs. If you're not fitting, if God is not in your story, then your checkbook will actually prove that.
Yeah.
Or your online account for most people when they do. You look at your online drafts and all that stuff. So the warning sign would be, where are you putting your money, your finances, to where you know that God's in the story type thing. And so, and again, I'm not saying that just because I'm a pastor and I want people to give to this church, although I am a pastor and I want people to give to this church.
Yeah.
Right. But
Life's got to go on.
Yeah. Yes. But it is one of those that I think that is one of the most visible warning signs, that if you're doing a check on a person and you're doing a check on yourself, that would be one of those signs. The other sign would be, are you regularly worshiping?
Yeah.
and I'm not a stickler for coming on our campus. But because I talked to a guy, he hadn't been to our campus for a number of weeks. He said, "We've been watching online." I said, "Awesome, great." So they're regularly worshiping. So they're making that time out, and I think they do it live. They don't watch it, later. I think they actually tune in at one of the early services. But this is also one of those signs that we believe historically the church says, is God part of your story?
Yeah.
Then are you worshiping God because he's a part of your story? Or is he just somebody ancillary, which means
Good word.
1 or 2 times a year type thing?
Mm.
So, and which there are people like that. So, and we'll see him in a couple of weeks.
I didn't say that. You didn't. I agree with you, but I didn't say it. But no, and so I think that's so interesting. And I think one of the reason that's powerful is because these other things, right? Like money, especially, but also like what space does encounter with God and offering my gratitude to God have in our lives in that sense? But also like the church community, like there are narratives that if we're living in are going to keep us from valuing those things. But there's like, those are the, what do you call it? The gauges on a car dashboard in a sense that like, oh, I think I may be drifting here a bit. I'm going to zoom ahead a little more. So we can talk about like dominant cultural stories. So I'm going to take two of these questions and kind of shove them together. So one, in your mind, like what are some of the dominant stories that get thrown at us? And then if it makes sense or if it comes to mind for you, what story do you think the kingdom of God tells that's different?
I think the stories that seem to dominate what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm seeing. And to some extent lived it, but not, I don't think to the extent that I'm seeing now. And I've seen in other folks. Of course, there's always, you don't want to throw stones in a glass house, but
Yeah.
but what I'm seeing is that so many families are dominated by what their kids want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And everything revolves around this child.
Mm-hmm.
Young all the way through teenage years and later teenage years. And that child being involved in A, B, C, 1, 2, it doesn't matter. And that is so I talked to a family about this literally Sunday. She was going in late to service. I think she was going in late to service, but we started talking, and she was lamenting that so many people are so busy that Sundays are irrelevant to them because they have so many things going on, and I'm not going to tell what those are. Most people know what they are.
Yeah.
And she said, I don't want my child to say, "Oh, we're doing this on Sunday," instead of going to church. And so and this child could participate in that very well. But she said, I didn't want to send that message. So they're not allowing their child to do some of the things that maybe some of their friends are doing.
Yeah.
Because it would appear that they would be letting that be the dominant influence in their life rather than letting worshiping God, following Jesus to be the dominant part of their life. And I'm being vague because I don't want to cast aspersions on any people type thing because I do not know everybody's heart, do not know all this going on, but I see a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of it. And I think that younger families really get obsessed over what their kids are involved in. And I don't want to say they push them to do that, but they definitely don't discourage them
Oh, 100%.
from being involved in many different things.
Yeah.
Many of those things will take the place of being in church on Sunday or being in a small group, even being in a small group.
Yeah.
Even they don't have time for that,
Mm.
right? I would be perfectly happy. Truthfully, I'd rather have a person involved in a group that's following Jesus, studying God's word, being wholehearted in their living, and they just happen to miss Sundays a good bit, but they're involved in a group. I'd rather take that than saying, I'm just going to come to church on Sunday. I'm going to watch Sunday 1 hour a week and do nothing else, right? So,
Sneak in, sneak out.
yeah. But that's dominating the culture so much that they can't even have a group to be a part of.
I think one of the things one of those narratives underneath that with everything you just said is also, in some probably not subconscious ways, a lot of focus on comfort. I'm not going to put this on everybody, but I have encountered some young families like you just described, where for them, we're going to do what our kid wants, even if it's not those words, comes out of, well, it's just too big of a fight otherwise. Or the folks who are like, yeah, I'm coming in church, I'm checking it out, I'm leaving, not really talking to anybody. Typically, there is avoiding discomfort there too, right? And just
that and some FOMO going on. They're going to fear their kids missing out on something.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Because, which is interesting because then, and we could do this all day, then you want to ask questions about like, hey, what is your narrative for what your job as a parent is, right? Do you believe that the story you're living as a parent is that I'm here to show this young person what it means to love God and live with God on a daily basis and to provide for them and to love them well and to show them what it means to do that faithfully in their own life to set them up for success later? Or are we just kind of rolling with the punches, making it day by day, and what happens is what happens?
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying that, well, if your story's not 100% right, how dare... What I'm getting to, that's kind of our next section here, is that part of what we should be doing in our discipleship training is working on replacing these stories, right? I loved my grandfather. He passed away in 2018. One of the men that I respect the most, faithful man, loved God, loved his family so well. But I believe near the end of his life, one of his kind of narratives was that like, oh, I'm useful if I can work. And when his health started failing, he had a really hard time, right? And I don't begrudge him that. Like, it's difficult. But that's one of those things of like, if we're doing our jobs as followers of Jesus, it's memorizing scripture, right? It's going to church, it's doing all these things, but doing them in a way that's reaching the deeper parts of ourselves and that's replacing some of these stories. And Sunday, I use this kind of metaphor of your story versus God's story really to talk about like who's in control, right? But there's just such a relief that comes from us not having to be at the center and the ones who run the show and that everything hinges on by putting God back in the center of that story, right? So, I don't know, just thinking about this whole thing about discipleship as story replacement. I'm just curious, before we start asking, anything come to mind for you there in general?
No, I wrote down something that you had said. I forgot what part. I think it was 75% of the way through. Something like that, because you had asked the question, or you made the statement that your story needs to end and God's needs to begin. So I wrote that down, and I didn't quote you exactly, but that's sort of what we're sort of walking around a little bit here, is that that we shouldn't be making the story about us.
Mm-hmm.
My story needs to end and God needs to begin. So that I think that's a decision that we have to make. That, okay, I need to get myself what I want out of this story and let God begin to do what He wants in this story, type thing. And I thought that's sort of the frame of thinking that we should have we should be thinking about, because so many of our stories are being written with us as the major character.
Yeah.
And God said, wait a second, the the story of you, it, it needs to be involved. I need to be involved. I should be the primary player in a story. So
Primary author, driver in that sense, which is why so much of this comes down to the idea of yielding and surrender, right?
yeah, I think something. I have no idea what this person does on these movies, by the way.
Mhm.
But I always see executive producer,
Yeah.
and I have no idea what they do.
Not a clue.
Right? Because I know, okay, I saw, that guy wrote it and that guy directed it, or sometimes it's the same person. I sometimes think that we have God as the executive producer, but have no idea what he's doing. Yeah. Whereas, like you said, he wants to be not only the writer, but director of our story.
And the director, the writer, the star, the one filling up the craft services table and giving you the food you need, give us our daily bread, like all of it, right? I don't know, I'm really drawn to that idea. And we're going to be pretty close to calling a day here. We're talking about...
Supposed to have a clock. Do we have a clock?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Time exists, possibly. Talking about the ways that stories influence us. Like, I've known a lot of workaholics. Juan and I are in a men's study where one of the comments made was that there are no workaholics. There are only sluggards who prioritize their job instead of the work for them to do at home. Where it's actually you being lazy and caring about the thing God really wants you to care about. If you believe that your life is about your career, that is a narrative decision versus I am made to value what God wants me to value, and my family is top of that list in that sense. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's, I don't know. I just know some young people who have had some really toxic dating relationships where it's like, why are you even doing that? Because you think that's what you're made for. Or I don't know. We could spend all day doing this. But what we're driving at here is this idea that life is not about us being in the director's chair. It's about submitting to God's direction in that sense. And not even just like, you should do this, you should do this, but in the like, oh, you have complete authority over everything today. And that's hard because it requires trust. And I think what we're talking about is one of the reasons that sanctification is such a difficult thing and it takes so long, is because this doesn't happen in a day, because we get so many blind spots. But listen, I think we're about at our time here. So Kyle, any closing thoughts before we kind of start wrapping up?
People remember stories, and they're not going to remember Kyle or Nick for us expounding on a theological concept. They're going to remember how we played a part in their story.
Yeah.
And what kind of part are we going to play in their story? Are we going to play a part where God is using us to influence and be a part of their story? Or are we just going to be someone that is a footnote in their story? One of the things that I've loved about being a pastor here for these years that I've been here is I get to be a part of stories of baptism, of weddings, of births, and deaths.
Yeah.
So I've been a part of a lot of stories, and that's been a privilege, but it's also me understanding that part of being in the story of God's story is that I'm also going to be a part of other people's story. And we all can play that part. We all can be a part of that. And if we're all living the story and it's not our story, then for lack of a better way of putting this, our story is going to bleed over into other people's story.
Yeah.
And that I think that will be one that honors God if we are in the right story.
Yeah, and the outcome isn't for us to decide, right? All that we can do is, press a thumb into it and wake up each day and do it as faithfully as we can.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Kyle. I'm gonna end with kind of a challenge here for the audience, for myself too. So I'm gonna challenge you to practice noticing the stories that you're living in this week. I'm gonna specifically challenge you to think about the moments when you're stressed, disappointed, or when you are feeling successful. And I want you to stop and ask yourself, am I reacting from my story or from God's right now? Why is that? Because those are the places where what we truly believe shines through, regardless of what we say rationally, right? It's those moments of personal impact and like, oh, this matters. That's where what we really believe comes out. So let me challenge you to do that. And if the answer is, I don't know, good news. You just got a great thing to go talk to Jesus about. And that's a good place to start. So for myself and for Kyle Gatlin, for our lovely listeners or viewers, thank you very much. Feel free to catch sermon audio every Monday morning and podcast Thursdays at 5 a.m. specifically. I'm getting a nod from our producer. Great. So you can catch it on your drive. But yeah, on behalf of us and everybody here at Covenant, go in grace, go in peace, and be blessed.